All right, that was a lot of fun for me to film. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be doing the sermon live again today. It's been a while since I've done this, but it's great to be here with you today, bringing a message from God's Word. And last week we began a new series called As Family We Endure. And you should have received a booklet. It should have been dropped off at your home in the last day or so. It may have been in your mailbox. It may have been near your front door. And if you didn't get one, please let me know. I will get one out to you as soon as possible. I hope that nothing happened to the ones that I was able to deliver. And this series, I have to say, the series has already been an interesting one because we're following the Israelites as they wander through the wilderness on their way to the promised land. And in a lot of ways, it feels really relevant. It feels really of the moment with what we're dealing with today. It feels like God is moving and that he's bringing us somewhere, but getting there is a lot harder than I expected it to be. Now, the book of Numbers, it doesn't tell us about COVID or masks or vaccines, but it does show us the story of how the Israelites reacted to the difficulty in the journey to the promised land. And over again, it shows us the ways that God responded to his people. I want to say it shows us how he always protected them, how he was always there with them. And in many ways, that's true. That is what we read. But if you read through the book of Numbers, you see that the Israelites continually make choices that bring them away from God, that pull their focus from God. And even though this is a pattern that we see, even though we read about the ways that God's anger burns against his people, the problems that they cause for themselves, ultimately, the people make it through the wilderness. And it's not the same group that set out, but God is true to his promise, and he brings his people to that promised land. And this week will be this time that we spend looking at the book of Numbers will certainly include the Israelites' failures, but we'll be looking at God's faithfulness through all of that and the way that he carries his people through difficult circumstances. Now, before we moved to British Columbia, I did a lot of work in the field of outdoor education. I ran programs on geocaching and nature journaling. I did some day camps. But one of the things that I did with some regularity was I would run activities that involved harnesses and heights. It was an incredibly common occurrence for people to get all of their gear on, to get connected to the safety equipment, and to get up to a significant height. And then, right when it was time for them to complete a task, they would freeze. They would become immobile. And one of the places I worked was at a camp that had a zip line. It was actually two zip lines that ran side by side, and they were about 1,000 feet long. And you could go down with a friend, and sometimes people raced, and it was definitely one of the most popular activities at the camp. And so people would get their harness on, they'd get the tether over their shoulder, and they would walk up the hill to the zipline tower. And they'd walk up the stairs, they would wait in line, they'd step forward when it was their turn, they'd get attached to the line, everything would be checked, double checked. Sometimes I would triple check it just to make sure. And then they would be asked to sit on the ledge with their feet hanging down. And when the line was clear at the bottom, there was a gate that I would pull over, and the participant would be asked to just lean forward, to slip off the edge, and let the harness and tether take their weight, while the pulley took them on a ride down the hill, across the pond. And I actually have a video that I was able to find of that zip line that I just want to share with you.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Woo! Oh my goodness! Yo! Yeah! Woo! No! I want to get to the top. Yeah!
Yeah!
Cross your legs now. Oh, you're kidding me. I get the lake.
I'll stop it there. So you get a sense of what that experience was like. There was a lot of fun, excitement, go woo as you go down. But it was pretty common for that gate to be pulled back and for the operator at the top to count down. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. And the person is still sitting there. And you'd ask if they were all right, and there you might count down a few times, just as they talk to you about what they were thinking and how they were feeling. Uh, you'd give them some coaching, try and help them through this process. And most of the time, they would get there. They would lean forward, sometimes with their eyes closed. They would lean forward and slip off the edge and have a great time. But every now and then, the gate would go back across. They would scooch back from the edge. They'd get disconnected. And they would walk back down the hill with all of their gear intact. Everyone who signed up for the activity thought that they were going to do it. Everyone who walked to the top of the hill, who climbed the platform, thought that they knew what was going to happen. But for some people, when they got there, they couldn't get past their fears. They couldn't trust the equipment that they were connected to. They couldn't trust the experiences of those who had gone before them. They just felt paralyzed. So they turned back and they missed out on something special. Today, we're looking in Numbers 13 at the account of the spies from each of the tribes of Israel who were sent to see what the promised land looked like. We don't have an account of their actual journeys, but we have the report that they brought back. We have the report of what they saw and how it made them feel. We're going to begin reading this morning in Numbers 13, starting in verse 1. The Eternal One said to Moses, "Send men who can spy out the Canaanite land that I'm giving to the Israelites. Pick one man with demonstrated leadership from each of the tribal families." And Moses did so. He sent the 12 heads of Israel out from Paran wilderness camp, just as the Eternal told him. And these are the men who went and the tribes they represented. Shammua for Reuben, Shaphat for Simeon, Caleb for Judah, Igal for Issachar, Hoshea for Joseph's tribe, specifically Ephraim, Palti for Benjamin, Gadiel for Zebulun, Gadi for Joseph's tribe, Manasseh, Amiel for Dan, Sether for Asher, Nabi for Naphtali, and Goyal for Gad. These are the names of the men selected to spy out Canaan. And Moses changed the name of Hoshea, son of Nun, to Joshua, who would succeed Moses. And Moses sent this group to spy out the land of Canaan, saying, "Trek through the southland desert of Negev and up into the high country. I want you to tell us about the land and especially about its people. Are they strong or weak? Are there a lot of them or only a few? Do their cities have fortifications or are their camps open all around? Also, is the land itself good or bad? Is its soil rich or poor? Are there any trees? Be bold and bring back samples of what grows there, like their grapes." It was in midsummer when you'd expect them to find grapes just beginning to ripen. They set out, these men, and explored the land from the flat Zin wilderness, north of Paran, where the rest were camped, all the way to Rehob on the coast and Lebo Hamath much farther north. They trekked first into the Negev and up to Hebron, a city built 7 years before the Egyptian town of Zoan in the Nile Delta. And there they saw the giant Anakite people, including the clans of Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. And they checked out the lush Eshcol riverbed, that, as its name suggests, grew bunches of grapes. So thick and heavy were the clusters that when two of the men cut down one branch holding one cluster, they had to carry it on a pole between them. They also picked up some pomegranates and figs from that place. And after 40 days, they returned from exploring to the camp of Kadesh in the Paran wilderness, and went directly to Moses and Aaron and all the Israelite congregation, which had gathered to hear what the scouts had learned and to see what fruits they had brought back with them. And they said to Moses, "We checked out the land just as you'd instructed us to, and here's what we've discovered. It is rich, very rich. One could say that it flows with milk and honey. And look, here is some of its fruit. The land is highly desirable, but the people who already live there are really strong. Their cities are enormous and fortified, and what's more, we saw the Anakites there. And in the Negev, there are Amalekites, and the high hill country are Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites. As for the seacoast, Canaanites live there and along the Jordan River too." But Caleb calmed the congregation, and he spoke to Moses. "We should go straight in, right away, and take it over. We are surely able." The other scouts said, "No way, we can't do it. The people who are already there are too strong for us." So the report of these other scouts was quite disheartening. It made the people question God's promise. The other scouts said things such as, "The land that we surveyed virtually eats its own, and the people themselves are gigantic. We saw the massive Anakites who descended from the ancient Nephilim. We look like grasshoppers compared to them, and they know it." So this chapter that we've just read starts with Moses receiving instructions from God about who is to go spy on the promised land. One person from each tribe, equal representation from among the families of Israel. The representatives are selected, they're given the directions, how to go, what to look for, and they're sent out. Pay attention to these things, bring back reports about them, and bring samples if you can. So the spies went out, and the spies came back, and they begin to tell about what they saw. And this is what's so interesting about this particular chapter, because they start giving this report and they say the land is rich, it's flowing with milk and honey. Look at the fruit we brought back. It's really great. The report, it confirms everything that they've been told about this land. It sounds great. It's just what God has promised. But the spies keep talking, or at least a number of them do. It's great, but the people who are there are strong. It's great, but their cities are fortified. It's great, but there are big, strong people all through the land. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's everything we imagined and more, but we are scared. There are people already there, and it frightens us. And it made the people question God's promise. God promised us this, but it looks like it's going to be hard. But then one of the spies, Caleb, speaks up and he helps to paint the picture of why this report is so strange. He says, "Let's go, let's do this. We can beat them." This was the land they'd been promised by God, the same God who'd led them out of Egypt, the same God who parted the Red Sea, who's been appearing before them in pillars of fire and smoke, the same God who has been feeding them. He told them that the land was theirs. So let's go for it. Let's hurry up and get there. We can definitely do this. Caleb holds forth that promise. But the other spies counter that. No, no, we can't do it. The people who are already there are too strong for us. They're gigantic. We look like grasshoppers compared to them. They know this. They see how small we are. They see how much stronger they are. It's great. It's wonderful. It's everything God said it would be, but it's going to be too hard. We can't do it. God said it was our land, but the people there are too big and scary. We can't. The report of the spies breaks the spirit of the people, and they question God's promise. They've been told what it will be. They've been told what to expect from the land, and some of them have seen what the reality is. And they're sitting at the top of the zipline tower. They're frozen in place. They aren't willing to slide off the edge and trust that they will be safe. They aren't willing to take that action to experience something incredible. And Caleb is right there. He's telling them, it's good. We can do it. Come on. Let's go. We've got this. But they're looking around. They've taken their eyes off of God, on what he's done for them, on the ways that he's taken care of them, even in this in-between space, in this wilderness. They're looking for their own reassurance. They're looking for their own stability. They want to be able to set their own 2 feet on the ground and feel on their own that they are safe without having to trust anyone other than themselves. And I get it. I mean, I've taught rock climbing and high ropes and run zip lines for years, and I can't even count the number of times that I've been frozen in place. You're high up in the air. You know that you should be able to trust the equipment. You know that you should be able to trust the ropes. I could even tell you what the safety rating was of each piece of equipment in the structure. But sometimes the height, it really got to me. And I understand being afraid. I understand what it looks like to see the world around you and to know that God is taking care of you, to know that God is taking care of you, but to still have a hard time taking that next step, to move in faith to where God is leading you. Because sometimes it's a movement right towards the very thing that frightens you. And I get it. It's frightening because it's new and different and it's not what you're used to. It's frightening because to go there, you have to surrender control. You have to place your trust outside of yourself. And that's something that's very hard for us to do. And no matter how many times God has shown us his faithfulness, no matter how many times he's brought us out of slavery and into freedom, no matter how many times he's gone before us, protected us, made a way where there seemed to be no way, no matter how many times he's provided for us, that moment where we have to surrender control, to step out and trust that he is going to hold us, that he is going to continue to protect us, can be a very scary place, even when we know it shouldn't be. Even when we know what's going to happen and we know that God is in control. And the Israelites, when they received this report, they allowed their fear to take over. They let it override what they knew about God and his faithfulness to them. They let it override what they themselves had seen and experienced, and they backed away from the edge. They disconnected, and they walked back down from the tower. They decided they didn't want to have that experience, and they rejected what God had for them. It wasn't a matter of being afraid and walking through that space. They walked away. In chapter 4, we read that they even talked about going back to Egypt, back to slavery. They turned their backs on God's promise. So they didn't experience it, except for Joshua and Caleb. They stayed in the wilderness until everyone had passed away. And only those two who were willing to step out, who trusted that God would do what he promised, that he would make a way, that he would take care of them, only those two would experience those incredible things that God had in store for them. The place that we're going, it doesn't always look like the place that we've come from. And on the other side of COVID, there's a very real chance that things aren't going to look like they did in 2019. God has sustained us through this time, and he is bringing us through this. And he's bringing us to a new place. And there are a lot of things out there right now that are frightening. As we watch the news, as we track the numbers about everything, I understand why people are scared. It makes sense to me. But what we have to guard against is letting it paralyze us, letting it keep us from going where God is leading us. I don't think that that means that we should defy the public health regulations. I don't think that we should try to do things the way that we always have. Because God isn't bringing us back to that place. God is bringing us somewhere new. And that's where we need to have our eyes fixed. It's going to look different. And it's going to be incredible. And we're going to have to trust him. We're going to have to step out in faith, recognizing that he has brought us this far. And he has not abandoned us. He has protected us. He has sustained us. He goes before us. We're going to play some music now. And while it plays, I'd ask that you not sing unless these words are true for you. If you feel paralyzed, if you feel like you can't move forward, I understand that. I understand why. If you need to sit there for a while on the edge of the platform, just breathing, finding your trust, building up your capacity to surrender, we understand that. It may be more than you can handle in this exact moment. If that's where you find yourself this morning, then ask God for the strength, for the faith, for the ability to surrender, to push off into a new space, trusting that he will carry you. If that's where you find yourself, in a place where you can let go and know that God is carrying you, know that he's bringing you through, then sing out these words. Proclaim them. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.